Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 9.11. And of course, we're playing as Germany this time. I want to thank everyone just for showing up, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. They tell me to do that in YouTube school, just that call to action that seems to get more people to subscribe than if you don't. So keep it up. Sorry if you hear me say it too often. Okay, we are shifting to the west. That is what we are doing. We are moving west. We moved a great bulk of the air power that was in the east. Some we're keeping here just still as sort of deeper interceptors. And some was already over here. But let's put these guys up here as interceptors, and come up to this. I really like. No, this is unhistorical because the Germans organized their air power in these Luftfloats here, if you will, and they were mixed formations. You know, meaning there would be fighters and bombers and all that in one organization, and that's really good for actual organization and planning. They did other stupid things too, but when the Germans did fairly well, at least for the time period, you know, and at the start of the war, getting inter-service coordination, you know, Army, Air Force, Navy working together. And so, like I was saying, it's better in a practical sense to have them organized up so that the same guy who's planning the bombing missions are also planning the, say, fighter escorts, if you will. Where Britain did, and now that we have some more stuff up here, we'll put a Gallon too. Adolfo. Where Britain had its three commands, is sort of what I took this from, is Fighter Command, Bomber Command, and Coastal Command. Coastal Command dealt with naval support, basically. You know, the seaplanes, naval bombers, but other aircraft were either on, permanently or temporarily assigned to Coastal Command because they had to, whether it's sinking submarines or dealing with other attacks on naval operations. Bomber Command, which was its offensive, mostly sort of strategic operations. And then Fighter Command, which was primarily a defensive operation over Britain. Now, of course, it's different once you're out here, because in London they're not controlling any operations, so you'd have some sort of local air command. But just for me playing, and this is why I'm talking about it, maybe for you, having these organized up this way to quickly find, oh, what units aren't operating? Well, right now we're not advancing anywhere, so we don't really want any ground support, kind of thing, and we're not being attacked significantly or anywhere, that we want to put in ground support, so that's cool. We've got all our units outside of Russia. Let's grab these guys and put them here. Well, maybe both of them. Yes. We're sending all of these guys for the invasion of France. I just, with the limitations, we have these guys here, and we're getting Danzig. with the IC limitations, I just really feel that I need to keep it Ironheart, Eberhard, that I haven't built my normal production levels. Not that I'm concerned about defeating France. I'm not, but it just means more that I'm behind schedule, if you will. Okay, I don't know why it likes this air officer, but cool. I'm gonna stick somebody there. Yeah, that'll work. We're putting these light infantry units up here. Let's send in another corps. HQ. Got a bunch. Just let's see. Yeah, that's a good one for this operation going up into Denmark. Well, I wanted to. That's it. Yeah. Let's give him a commander. Looking for an airborne commander. Command the school. I think technically it may have still been student, even though eventually he gets 7th. Flieger Corps. Not so much in the American Army as I understand it, and again, I say that because I'm thinking in different periods and times. But you do have the sort of, shall we say, British phenomenon that I think sometimes you see von Rundstedt without, latish in the war, without general or sort of extended field marshal rank collar tabs, and I'm not absolutely sure because there are different sort of collar tabs on them, and I'm not the best at identifying some of the stuff. But I sort of, in my mind, thinking of him as when he's dressing as a colonel, because I think he's like officially the colonel of some German regiment. The British do this a lot, in which like you'll have Princess Margaret, the colonel of such and such regiment, and she's had zero military training, zero any of that stuff. She's just sort of a figurehead who once a year or whatever gets dressed up in a sometimes they're women, sometimes they're men, dressed up in that unit's sort of or uniform or version of the uniform, more version if it's a woman, for some parade thing, and she's like the official head of it. But the actual why am I not seeing a good? I'm not paying attention close enough, maybe. Here, Shuren works well. We'll go to Shuren. What do they want us to buy? No, thank you. I'm not going to ship from there. Heading a unit, and also the British Army, particularly, and I still think it persists to this day. You're normally a you normally serve in a particular regiment, even though you may have other jobs, and sometimes you're shifted out of it. And even though you may be going, even a general, you still may be a theoretically a captain or something in your regiment of origin. So I think sometimes you get the idea that people are like, because it started out with student, may still officially be commanding the Fallschirmjäger Schule, but some other guy, maybe like Shuren, is actually running it, and you're out commanding your 7th Flieger Corps or something. So and there are of course traditional von Rundstedt, and I don't know what uniform, because it may have some unit badge on it that where he's still like officially colonel of something. That's sort of the tradition is either he may have served in that regiment way back when, or it's just such a an honorary post that he's given, and that. And so there's a, some of, oh, what am I doing here? Not paying attention. There's a tradition of that, but it also has a practical oh, infantry standard bands. That's what happened. Okay, we got that. It's grayed out. Okay, good. Oh, we can do mechanization of infantry soon here too. The practical aspect of it, including for a modern army, is based in the idea that if somebody like student is officially in charge of the school that's training potentially all levels of personnel for the the Fallschirmjägers, he's overseeing the training program, at least, any major changes. So, he may not be, daily sitting in the office and running the school and going out and talking to the students or instructors or whatever, but he's, seeing the overall program, and he may very well be, if not actually, appointing or who's commanding what within the school, whether promotions or just simply whose job what he's consulted with, so over what's doing. So he still has his imprint stamp on what's being done within especially something like a much more closed system of the Fallschirmjägers and that kind of thing. So it does have a modern fighter ground crew training. I'm trying to do two things at once: talk to you about something and play the game. So you have this various. Oh yes, we'll do that for sure. One of you commented, I'm sorry guys, I know, and I do sort of get to know at least your screen names and personalities, but when it's maybe a couple of 3 days away from when you post something, just the way my mind works, I sort of forget who, and I don't want to, whether for good or bad reasons, don't want to contribute or attribute something to somebody else. But one of you were a while ago when we were really low with steel, and of course using lots of steel, and why am I not worrying about the big low numbers in steel compared to worrying about rare materials, and I have lots of rare materials. Well, as you can see here, we are trading a bunch of for a bunch of steel. But money-wise is much less, and we can build that back up. Again, money-wise, much cheaper than we are for rare materials. So that going down low does affect things like events won't fire unless you have enough steel in your reserves or something, which we were facing a little bit of that, or decisions won't fire, or both. So there are reasons to be concerned about your overall totals, something like steel, but it's something I'm not, worried about in any sort of long-term or strategic effect. Something like, yes, we want to build it back up, but it's not like I'm counting it as being a major concern. I'm thinking right around early June. We're still moving these guys across here. People like, and I haven't seen the uh-oh. I took out my commerce raider. Uh-oh. The Totenkopf of decision, I think, fire, but okay, advanced armor designs, very good. So that is here, and does allow us to do self-propelled artillery brigades, but we are that, but we have other things we want to see about doing. Yes, this is the critical 8 hours. Obviously, we already have 2, so that's no, we have 1 of 6, I guess, because that would be I don't know. Yeah, so I guess we have 4 hours currently. That'll reduce time in between attacks by another 4 hours, which would be great. Sometimes I worry about why some of these events aren't, or decisions aren't firing, and it could just simply be that there's a date in it, and we haven't reached it yet. Yeah, we'll go with him. Okay. Well, I'll put him here temporarily. I was waiting for again, this is one of the things, there's a whole home army that's supposed to fire at some point from GGA, and I haven't seen that happen. Again, it just may not be the right date yet, but I don't know. There we go. It has been a while since we played this. And yes, I can look in the code and figure it out, but don't want to do it right now while I'm thinking about it. It means stopping the episode. Well, it means you get to look at a funky screen while I go look. So we took Poland down in May. We're looking at June, which is still coming here, but now I'm pushing it maybe June 10th. Get everybody here, get supplies to flow over to here. I mean, obviously there's already supplies flowing, but the scale of the supply problems is needed, and the AI has bad logistical sense. How are we doing on production? Okay, good. Getting to some of these units that I was really hoping to have. Been worked on by now and much nearer to done, if not done. Don't know that they would have been done now, even if fully into it, but these guys here, especially that, 40 ICs, I want June 27. I don't know if I'm going to wait that long. 20 July, I'm not going to wait till July for that. I'm not going to wait for August for that. Don't know why that's taking so long. No, 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 not you, Yugoslavia. Okay, I don't know why we haven't had the second Vienna thing yet, which second Vienna award. You may wonder why I'm so concerned about that. You know, I am going to not pause the episode, but you get to watch the screen while I go look up the Vienna Awards coding. The reason I'm concerned, and I'll just, if you want to skip ahead, be my guest once I get looking over at it, is you're supposed to have at some point the second Vienna Award, in which gives a big chunk of Romania to Hungary, but we've already got Hungary in it. I'm not that worried about it. What I'm also worried about is the event to give this to Bulgaria, which will get Bulgaria into the Axis. Otherwise, Bulgaria may take a long time to get into the Axis, and I would prefer not to have that happen. So, I want to just check out that. And, oh, well, I know the Bulgarian thing, I'm pretty sure doesn't fire it once Romania is in the Axis. Now, this is firing because the Soviet Union just took all of this from Romania. So, that's a little bit of a concern. And I could artificially fire it. I presume you can still hear me. Okay. See how quickly I can get into this and figure this out. Events. Okay. The decision. Okay, Hungary, non-faction comment exists. Hungary, Romania, any faction. Romania controls. Central, allow. Not Romania. Not war Romania effect. Second Vienna Award here. This Germany, Romania, Soviet Union. Romania is in faction. No, it could be in a faction. Government is that. Has flag. Not has flag. Romania controlled by. Or that. Okay. Well, it is a decision. Fairly complicated. Potential, right? No, no. Or okay, I don't know why it hasn't fired. It fires for the Hungarians. It seems to, and then well, we're going to welcome aboard. We're not going to say no to another Axis partner. We already do have that. And airborne assault tactics, that is good. Airborne assault tactics. I think we have other things I want to do. More importantly, that's calling to me. That's calling to me. Extra wide track, since that is a 1940, that gets my attention. And we have another, oh, several. Standarta, yes, okay. And let's, now of course we drag down because there's so many of those HQs we got to get past. And yes, starting the war as late as we did can be, what's Well. Oh, wow, lots of stuff from... Okay, okay, there you are in Poland there. Attach you there. You're in Poznan, okay. Not to the Berlin Corps, let's go to guys, because we're gonna move you part of our Friends Watch border guards. Convince the Soviet AI that we really have super strong defenses hanging out on their western front. We really can't do much about the revolt risk because we've annexed them. Okay. Another battlefield command enters. Okay, wrong Kluge. Good. I think that's production queue stuff. Yes, go to the top. It's only 2 ICs and we want it out as soon as possible. Okay, from George, 1941, major contributor to TRE. Established the General Director, der Ostbahn, Director General of Eastern Railways, based in Warsaw. Basically, if you look at a map of the period, you can see this sort of border on it here without having any borders on it, simply by looking at the railways. The amount and number of railways from what was part in the German Empire before World War I compared to outside of it and what had been Russian territory is dramatically different, and it continues to be so during the Polish government era. It's just interesting to note, for many reasons. The German Empire just was able to build so much more railway, and I put it down as to able because you go, oh well, what do you need a railway to this town? Well, simply by putting a railway to somewhere means that goods get there cheaper. Goods like farm produce, because presumably somebody's producing some sort of whether it's grazing animals or whether it's wheat or something. Possibly some mining or whatever. If the more railways that run around, the more infrastructure, the more economics happens. The town gets bigger, so you need more goods and services coming in and out of them, people moving around, so that what Russia as an empire could do versus what, and of course it's much larger. So, and I don't know this, but you could even say that, I know it wasn't, but even if Russia laid down equal miles of track as the German Empire did, Russia's so much bigger, so it's, density's less. But even once Poland gets independent, it is never able to economically put in something like laying down the railways that the German Empire did. Now I do know, well, I believe, and I'm sure. I'm sure there was some railway additions before the Nazis came to power. Just some railway put down somewhere, because there was goodish times during the Weimar period economically, and then of course there were disastrous times as well. But even at disastrous times, but those are, I'm thinking they're probably small spurs off from the railway, not major railway developments, because it had mostly had already been done. And I'm also, presumably they may have been adjusting things, adding lanes and improvements, but you may have not seen significant growth. But even once you get Poland, it's not able to get together. Well, the big thing, of course, for railways, in my opinion, I may be entirely wrong, is the steel. Made into rails. The rest is wood. You got, which for the railway ties, you got wood. I presume there's trees of the right thickness in Poland and type to make railway ties. Maybe you have to import them from Sweden or whatever. I don't know, but it's wood, a little bit more steel for or something for the spikes that go in, and then it's basically just sort of gravel and other sorts of laying down the bed. And okay, you get to some bridges. You can make decent railway bridges out of wood. The U.S. made hundreds of those during the 19th century. Some of them are really huge, rickety affairs that, few of them from photographs, I would be very, very leery to go over them. Others are not nearly as rickety, shall we say, but are sort of feats of high engineering using wood lichen logs or whatever kind of the way it probably looks very stable, but it's these are over big gorges and in some of our mountainous regions that we have here, that in the 19th century stuff that was built, that they knew when they were building it was just only going to have a year or two's useful life, because obviously building a wooden and I'm talking things that are 100 feet or higher, bridges going across, and they were actually stacked. It wasn't just that there was that high of a gap they were going over. They layered and layered and layered and layered wooden superstructures up, sort of like scaffolding, if you will. Wood doing that, and with the freezing and the thawing and all that going on, you're only going to have a few years, in my opinion, of, at least you should plan for only a few years, a good solid life to a wooden structure like that you're then taking. Oh, and there were many major accidents going on too. The biggest, one of the biggest, not maybe the biggest, but one of the biggest causes for accidents was scheduling and times, because hey, noon was the sun right above you, and so every area had different times until the U.S. came up with its official time zones, and that was done by the railways, so that they could schedule the trains so they wouldn't run into each other. But bridge collapses was another major catastrophes that were happening, and fires on railways, and on because coal engines, sparks or whatever coming out, landing on, or just people smoking or whatever in wooden railway cars. There were lots of disasters that, if we were to know about, really sort of consciously know about them, it would horrify us, at least in the American railway development. I just don't know how it was in Europe, how safe it was or wasn't. But it's a little different laying down the railway ties on the ground, because they're not, if they sort of rot away a little bit, you're not normally having nearly as traumatic of a situation. So it's not a whole lot. It's mainly the railway, the rails themselves are the big potential steel, possibly importation costs to do it. Other than that, it's labor. So it's and it gets people to work. But okay, so we can do this, and this will in time. So when Germany gets Poland now, because it's never had this. Back to this map. This part of Poland, it's always been Russia or Poland, at least in a practical sense, of the German Empire, pre-Napoleonic era. So Germany is, for multiple reasons, wanting to improve the railways, and in a very short time. Part of it is the planning of a war with Russia, but of course we're in alliance with Russia, so it isn't necessarily an overt war with Russia, but it is a general improvement, and I may go into it in more detail. I watched a very interesting thing on German railways, the Reich Bond, some time ago, and so the Reich Bond is a very strained, but actually ending up being a very efficient system within Nazi Germany. And so they did come in and into this part of Poland and go, hey, we've got to really bring these up to our standards, not just like again, like safety standards or And part of it, could be safety, but it's also, how much weight can a bridge take, whether a major bridge or a minor bridge, it doesn't really matter. How much weight can it take in railway cars? So if you're moving big railway guns or other things that are heavy, you need to be able to take that weight and over and repeatedly, as opposed to, lighter cars or whatever. So it's various things to improve it, as well as expand the railway. And Germany is, throughout this period, throughout the war, is straining at its greatest possibly that it can, dealing with the railways. They massively, during the war, massively increased the number of engines, railway engines going on. And also along with it, they're including rolling stock, the flatbeds, the boxcars, and all of that kind of stuff going on. Though those aren't nearly, the engines are the harder industrial thing to build. And they're constantly having this problem throughout the time period, which of course, knowing that, it puts how much they really valued killing off the Jews, that they had such tremendous, and it isn't just the power of the SS. I mean, that's part of it, but it's also because there was such specific needs for expanding or maintaining support for the various campaigns, and just having enough rolling stock moving around, that, trust me, that at times, no matter how much Himmler wanted something done, if Hitler hadn't thought it a priority to kill off the Jews, potentially a greater priority than winning the war, or maybe, shall we say, the real war was against the Jews. The sort of cool war that we like to watch documentaries about is the secondary war, between nations. So that's to the, and I know some of you, well, not most of you know that are watching, I think, at least commenting, but a few people are that I've gotten, again, that one sort of Nazi. Well, if you look at it, most of the people died of typhus or whatever and starvation in the death camps. No, the death camps, I mean, many people did of that, but the death camps, with everything set up, they were designed to be death camps. And, so, and this, I'm not putting this on the German people, because, yeah, the German people let it happen, but they didn't understand the true nature of the top level of the National Socialist regime. That I'll grant the German people at the time, the average German people. They did let the ostracization, the putting on the Jewish stars, happen to the Jews. They did let all, because they knew that was happening. They did know that all the Jews were being rounded up from their town. They did know that was happening. They might not have understood or wanted to understand what the final solution of these Jews was going to happen, but they did know that it was, they did let all that other happen. And again, before you come, well, they had no choice. The SS was just going to do it. Remember, sometime fairly late, 44, the SS is sort of in charge and sort of, doing what it wants to. Rounds up all the Jewish husbands of Aryan women in the greater Berlin area. And because the Aryan wives come out and protest, stand out in front of the police station or wherever it was, with signs, saying, "Free my husband," that they all get released. They all get released. But if they could pressure the Aryan woman to divorce that husband, and they did in many cases, in more cases than not, quite honestly, from my understanding. Then they arrested that husband, and he disappeared. So all it would take, even at the height of the SS, jackbooted terror, willing to shoot people, at the height of it, they were backing down when even it's in the few hundreds or less, 1 or 200 women out protesting. You would have had thousands of people in every city coming in, just 4,000 or 5,000 people daily coming out and protesting would have stopped the Holocaust. If it happened in every city in Germany, would have stopped the Holocaust or the rounding up of the Jews. If it was the right Aryan peoples coming out and protesting, it would have stopped it. But no, they didn't. So, and again, I'm not saying they understood what was going on entirely, or the nature of the true nature of the National Socialist regime, but that is what the real. I'm going down this, and I don't really mean to at the moment. But the more I understand the main thinkers, the Walter Doreys, the Rosenbergs, and these other thinkers of National Socialism, they really believed in this mystical power of the Jews and the mystical power of the Aryans. And they really thought that this sort of war was, in essence, being fought in this sort of realm. Much more so than what we normally come to understand. They really, this was the real war going on to them. And I will agree, because I know a few of you who I don't put any bad motives on. I may be wrong about that, but I really don't think you have bad motives. You're just trying to explain the way you understand your, say, family experience, back a few generations, or you're just understanding of Germany. Don't understand it in these terms, and I'm not disagreeing with your understanding of what they understood. It's just what these guys that formed the NSDAP, what they continue to believe, like the yogi from the East. Who's the yogi from the East? Did the yogi from the East have much influence on National Socialism and government policy? Yes, because the yogi from the East is Rudolf Hess. That's what he was called, I found out, amongst the sort of elites of the Nazis, the wives, the women, and whatnot. The yogi from the East. He was one of the vegetarians, if I remember that correct. And I didn't know this until recently, and recently, as in the starting of this series, is recently, because again, reading. It wasn't until he lived in Egypt, and I believe Alexandria, Rudolf Hess, until the age of 11. So, in America, again, I'm a little political here, but in America, we have the Dreamers, and the Dreamers deserve the right to stay. They don't know any other nation, any other country. They grew up in America because their parents brought them to. Because if you're born in America, you're an American citizen. These are the category that we call the Dreamers here in America are children that were brought as children. They keep saying without their approval because their parents brought them. Well, maybe. And if they're 1 year old, obviously they're being carried in their mother's arms. And they've been brought to America, and they know no other country, and a lot of them don't really even speak other languages well. Well, recently as in within a week or so of me making this episode, a dreamer who has been made some sort of California government official, appointed. So she's an illegal alien by definition to be a dreamer. She doesn't have any legality here. She now has a California government job. She's here illegally. She's a citizen of Mexico, and she's a dreamer because she was brought here as a child at age 14. So we have a U.S. government official who is a U.S. California state government official here who grew up in Mexico until age 14. So presumably didn't start learning English until after the age of 14 or sometime during the age of 14. She's entirely enculturated and grew up in Mexico. She's not an American. Now she may be 20 something now. She may have been here 10 years. I'm not stating she isn't. But normally by the time you're, let's say, 10 or so, if you've grown up in one culture, you've been enculturated. You've been inculcated with that culture. You are not you're something different now. And this is like, I saw this all the time when I was living in Scotland. Now in Scotland they speak a version of English. I say that in sort of multiple senses. They speak a version of English. And there's different versions. I sort of learned to be able to, with enough of an ear, to sort of tell where different people were from Scotland. Maybe not as much as a local who could really pinpoint it. You know, like maybe what part of Glasgow you're from, but I could tell if you're from Glasgow or you're sort of from, you know, Lothian area or wherever. I sort of could get to where I could tell that. But just all kinds of little attitudes were just different than mine because they were Scottish in the sense that they grew up in Scotland. I grew up in California. Now, at least half, roughly, of my ancestors are from Scotland. But the last ones came over around 1900. The first ones came before the American War of Independence from Scotland. So they've sort of brought some of the culture with them, and I can see some of the, shall we say, family culture that I sort of grew up in. Some of the stuff that's more similar to Scottishness versus to Englishness. But it's all sort of mixed, and it's sort of American. And so I could go and live in Scotland, and I could try to pick up a Scottish accent more. Obviously, I don't speak with one. I look enough like Scotsman that when I was living there, and you're going outside of the tourist areas, and I wasn't carrying a camera with me or whatever, and genetically, I'm all from that part of the world, but I'm a little darker skinned growing up in Southern California just because of the sun. I'm just trying to describe myself as not so brown. It's just, you know, a more reddish tinge or whatever, face, hands. Because I, you know, again, growing up in Southern California versus the Scots, which are very pale white, but there is sort of a category of British people that have, for some number of years, gone to work in, say, Saudi Arabia or somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula or some other parts of the world and have come back, and they sort of have this little, you know, more sunburnt skin type thing, if you will, more permanently. But I look enough like the local Scots that I go in and be in, like, because I used to go hunt before the internet. You couldn't just order, you know, old books on the internet. You had to go hunt them out. And so I found just about almost every single bookshop, you know, used bookshop in Scotland, and I really dug deep. There are a couple that I heard about that were just too remote that I never got to, but I dug through them and got hunting up old books there. And so I could go into a place like that, or some, you know, way off the tourist thing, go in, nobody would pay any attention to me until I opened my mouth. And it's sort of like a small shop, and then I would notice every single head would turn towards me. Who's that? And then look away. It wasn't like a big shock, but my accent, being an American, was who's in this store? And I'm just talking like 5, 6 people in a small shop. Everybody would look at me. So when I walked into the store, no one thought anything different about me. They thought I was one of them. But as soon as I opened my mouth and spoke, I wasn't one of them. And they wondered who, and this was obviously somebody going into the shop maybe the first time or the third time, but I hadn't been in, you know, I only been in there, you know, it was a month or more before, and no one, you know, was remembering me or the customers. So it's, you know, obviously I'm not, some of these were in really small towns. So I dug them out, looking for used bookstores. So they knew I wasn't a local, however much, you know, they knew who the locals were. But I was still sort of one of them until I opened my mouth. So, you know, if you get somebody who's grown up by 11 in a different environment than any other Germans, other than Germans living in Egypt, which is obviously at that time, a very small class of people, you're different. And this is why a lot of Americans have been very concerned, or were very concerned over Barack Obama, because he grew up a lot of these childhood years in Indonesia. It wasn't that he was black, and this was, you know, for a lot of the Americans, it was because he grew up in foreign countries, or he grew up out in Hawaii, which Hawaii is sort of foreign to most of us in America. They have a different culture out there. It's not foreign. Doesn't. Well, I'm in no way am I saying bad. It's just different. So, and at different times it would show up in his presidency. He just didn't understand things that if you grew up in America, it would show up. Some songs he'd sort of get wrong or whatever that he just didn't, you could tell that he just didn't grow up in America. Well, again, Rudolf Hess grew up in the East, as we sort of consider, if you will, Alexandria. And so he was the yogi from the East. He had all these sort of ideas, but he was a major influence on Hitler. And of course, Hitler and Hess were major influences on National Socialist thought. So all of this stuff may have not, because until Rudolf Hess's flight to England, and that was, there's multiple reasons, and it was heavily influenced by Haushofer. I think I'm pronouncing that name close to right. His astrologer. He was very popular with the German people. He was the guy who came out and did the sort of announcement or pre-speech for Hitler coming out. And lots of people really sort of thought of him as a really popular guy. So he was massively influential. So again, he and others, you have to take seriously their beliefs and their views of National Socialism and how their esoteric, their occult views influence what National Socialism thought and was. A lot of your National Socialist voters and party members, that particularly rural people, were devout Christians, either Protestants or Catholics. And they held that views very strongly. And if you had come out and said, vote for me, we're going to destroy Christianity, they would have never voted for the National Socialists. Never. Not at the beginning, whether that's in 1920 something, not when the early 30s when they're coming to power, not after they're in power, not in 1945. A lot of these, and the Nazis talk about the sort of, we'll use a modern term, low information voters that, or party members, and again, sort of rural people. And I don't, in no way am I saying dumb people. I'm just saying people that are, live on a farm. They have a basic level of education. They've read some books, but they're not well read. They don't understand. They didn't go through a course of comparative religions in college, because they never went to college. Again, it's not a stupidity thing. It's just, and I don't want to try to say that most of these people are uneducated. No, they have a basic level of education. And, again, we're talking in the 30s. And so these people, if they had understood the nature of the leadership and the goals of the National Socialists, would never have supported them. So if you talk about, and I happily have people share their understandings, their family experiences during this time period within it. But if you're talking about what they believe, I'm not going to disagree with you of what they thought Nazism was. What they thought, German revival, German awakening, better economics, and we talked about this before, more honorable, or regain their honor from the loss of the war. The war being the First World War. All of those kinds of things that they sort of are seeing as a positive thing of the National Socialists. I'll grant you that, and that's what they saw. That's what they projected, as well as what the Nazis wanted to project that they were for onto the people, and so they saw the world and the wars differently than I think the leadership saw the wars and everything else. So that's sort of what I'm talking about. And I could be entirely wrong. I'm going from some of the books and documentaries that I've read before, as well as this most recent one, Hitler's Monsters, which is sort of what I really like about Hitler's Monsters is the author went in and looked at things systematically and looked at original source material. So he completely dismisses the whole vril thing. There is that novel that was around, but that's that element of Nazi occultism. He can only point to showing up post-war, meaning only references supposed Nazi insiders using that term at all is post-war. So he dismisses that any serious Nazi thinkers, with, and I forget the novel about these people from the center of the earth or whatever. So he dismisses that as being anything real within National Socialism, and so I'm taking that he's correct in that he through his research hasn't found that, so it's not a real factor within it. So he's gone back and everything that he's talked about within it, and he definitely talks about that there's competing and conflicting views within the hierarchy of it. But all of his research is taken from period publications, whether widely distributed or limited distribution stuff within the SS, letters from the time period, diaries written at the time period. Everything that he's looking at is stuff from the time period, not post-war. Anything written that was post-war had to have reference to a period. Somebody was quoting a letter or something that they had gotten during the war when they were writing their autobiography after it, or something like that. It would take. That's the only time he uses post-war sources for his book. So just that kind of thing. So again, the importance of some of what was going on is interesting, but so we can do this, and I think we will. Let's see, metal 3000. Yes, we can afford that. Good. So we want to do the manpower, and we will eventually get that. Okay. Conserve the nation. Start working. Okay, so yes, we're gonna lose to do this. We will no longer have a strategic. Okay, so I think that actually means we will get a I don't know. But we're gonna lose 5 ICs. Boom. Don't like that. Okay. I do think it helps with some of our resources, but I don't like that. And I wish it was a little more clear as what was happening. Okay, the Thor. Yes, we'll launch her. Commerce Raiders. Send the Ordnungspolizei into the general government. Yes, we want to do that, even though they won't lower the revolt risk. Polish tooling machines. Continuously, the economic policies of Hitler and the Third Reich in the pre-war years aimed to provide large social and monetary advantages for members of the Volksgemeinschaft. Volksgemeinschaft, yeah, that's an important word and concept in the National Socialism. Sort of the, what is it? German, or the not German, but the people's mental view or whatever. Being at war, the lack of economic modernization of large parts of the medium-sized German industry, and the ongoing large-scale productions of peacetime consumer goods hampered the war effort. The ever-increasing demand for industrial capital goods to increase Germany's arms productions could not be met by the Reich's producers of tooling machines. During the Polish campaign, the Reich captured more than 4,000. That should be a comma, not a period. I know. Minor thing, but tooling machines, many of them the most advanced American quality. Yes, America was extremely good at building machine tools. Recently reading War in the West book, and which is dealing with American production elements of that, including Britain wanting to buy not just arms and equipment from America, but American machine tools. So, yes, of course, that's just a positive. Okay, yeah, we'll take this. Yes, we'll lose officers. Yes, we want that. Ethnic Germans from Lithuania repatriated. In accordance to the Moscow-Ribbentrop Agreement, the German organized repatriation of 40,000 ethnic Germans from Lithuania to Germany. Okay, this is something from revolverheld. I'm guessing most likely because it doesn't have an image again. The lack of images are or because it's in beta. Sorry. Again, a couple of things on this one, revolverheld. If you're watching, I think you need to have a check to see that Lithuania is in Soviet hands. There was a program in both Estonia and Latvia while they were still independent to move Germans out of there into German territory. There had not been a program for Lithuania because Lithuania had originally been part of the German sphere. So the first big moves to get the Germans out of the two northern Baltic states, the Germans compensated the Lithuanians, or the Lithuanian Germans, for the loss of their land. Sort of like, hey, yeah, we'll, you've got a farm, sure, we'll give you, reasonable amount for it, and then you move to Germany. Where the second wave that came out of the northern two Baltic states, it was basically you want out, come out, because it was after the Soviet takeover. I think so. Again, and I'd love to see more cited reference on this, but I think this only happens after the Soviet. Again, I could be wrong. Everybody, including revolverheld, but I think this only happens after you get the German or the Soviet takeover of Lithuania. So there should be a check for that. That was for quite a while because I was wondering why that was from some of the sources that I was looking at, that it was they were only coming from Estonia and Latvia for a while, and some maps and other things and reference to the Baltic German, the Baltic Deutsch coming out was just from those two countries. And I wondered why that, and I was at first thinking, well, because I guess they could, if once the Soviets take over, they could just sort of flood across the border, because it's just equal border. As long as the Soviets don't stop people leaving, they can just leave. No, it was because of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, and that was originally to be German sphere. But this section basically in here was originally to be in the Soviet sphere. So this was given to Germany in trades for this. That's what happened. Okay. Vidkun Quisling visits Hitler. In December 1938, Quisling met Hitler. The German leader promised to respond to any British invasion of Norway, Plan R4, perhaps preemptively with a German counter-invasion, but found Quisling's plans for both Norwegian coup and the Anglo-German peace unduly optimistic. Nevertheless, Quisling would still receive funds to bolster the National Samling, basically National Socialist, I believe in Swedish. Following the meeting, Hitler turned his attention to Scandinavia, convinced of the threat posed by the Allies to their iron ore supply. Hitler ordered the OKW to begin preliminary planning for any invasion of Norway. Preliminary plan was named Study Nord and only called for one army division. Okay, recently also reading some of this, and I know revolverheld, part of what he's coming up with a lot of these events for, he's reading some really good books, very expensive. I looked up in English at least to buy them, in German, but talking about detailed histories of German military operations in World War II. I forget the titles, and so he's getting some of the stuff. But part of this, from my understanding, is like Hitler before this time, before December 39, had never met Quisling. Not that he didn't know that there was a Quisling movement. There was. Again, it was really small percentage of people in Norway. But this was mainly to help convince Hitler to go after Norway, because he didn't want to go after, or it wasn't, I don't want to put it that way, it wasn't on his radar to wanting to go after Norway. It was because of some of these various Allied moves, and this was, if I'm not mistaken, the meeting was actually set up by Hermann Goering. Now remember, Hermann Goering's first wife was Swedish. He escapes after the beer hall putsch, being wounded, and to recuperate, and knowing that he's a wanted man, escapes and lives for a while in Sweden. He's also, I think, before that, sometimes he's like dealing with some Swedish airlines or something, not Air Force, but commercial airlines. So he has a lot of connections to Sweden. Well, obviously Sweden and Norway have a fair amount of connections, so he's sort of connected in that part of the world. So this is, as to try to counter, and this is all happening during the, not that this doesn't need to wait whether there's been a winter war or not, but this was sort of going on originally, because obviously the date is happening much later now, precisely because I think the conditions are that Poland needs to have been taken and whatnot. But is the idea that the British were thinking about going into Norway and Sweden, mostly, well, Churchill, again, I know I've not recently mentioned this, Churchill wants to, because Churchill at this time in 39 is First Lord of the Admiralty, not yet Prime Minister. He just wants to mine somewhere, putting sea mines somewhere up and around here to block, and he wants to do it particularly in the winter, to block at least some of the path out of Narvik, with sort of the idea that the ships could still get in and out, so maybe not like quite here, but somewhere around here, but they would have to either go through the minefields or go out into international waters where his subs could sink the ore shipments. So the violation of Norway's neutrality would be simply mining Norwegian waters, and of course, the English being the English, as well as wanting to have, the point isn't necessarily to sink German ships, it's to change their routing out to sea so that his submarines could sink the ships. And so if it's a Norwegian fishing boat, the subs aren't going to do anything about it, because it's not going to be carrying any, iron ore, or actually Swedish steel, because I think there's a steel mill up in here creating steel. They're going to just sink the right types of vessels out here that are carrying war supplies. And the British were, at this time, they for a while allowed neutral Italian ships going into neutral Netherlands to pick up German coal, to then take coal from neutral Netherlands to neutral Italy. Then after a while, Britain confiscates these ships. Once they allow it for a while, but then they stop the program. So they're confiscating neutral Italian vessels out at sea that are only going from neutral port to neutral port. So Britain is very willing to at sea, because Britain has, going back to before the Napoleonic era, but definitely cemented by the Napoleonic era, they are the rulers of the sea. So if things only happen at sea at the permission of Britain. Now, Norway has for its national populace size and for its economic size, not maybe its geographic size, but its economic size and its populace size, has actually a very large merchant marine. So Britain is very willing to, and they were doing a lot of this stuff, a lot more than I realized, is stopping ships at sea and going, hey, show me your papers, and we're going to inspect to make sure that your cargo matches the papers. Oh, you've got a load of machine guns here. you know, we may just confiscate this ship and the, the stuff in there. Oh, you've got a load of toys. Yeah, we'll let it through. And it could be, again, from neutral country to neutral country in a neutral ship. Depending on the cargoes and where they're going and what's going on, and the British may just confiscate it. So even if it was in Norwegian or Swedish hulls, if it was going to be what they thought a war material, just, steel, they would be willing to either sink if it doesn't obey, or if it obeys, put on a prize crew and inter that ship into a British port. Yes, that violates Norway's sovereignty, and that's why Churchill is not given permission by Chamberlain to do that. But as the Winter War is breaking out and getting Finland not doing so well, they're doing better than expected, quite honestly, but they expect it to be overrun. They expect that this is going to be the new Soviet border here, and they are under the understanding that the Soviets are a German ally, though not necessarily a war partner, meaning I don't think that, well, who knows what they thought, but they saw, well, war partner, they both invaded Poland. This is another Soviet invasion, so it's another totalitarian invasion that, wasn't being opposed by Germany, which pissed off, again, I'll say, Mussolini. He hated the idea that Germany let, not so much over Poland, but over Finland, that he let that happen. So you have the idea that the British are worried, one, that a Nazi ally is getting this, two, a Nazi ally is going to be within very close striking distance, and whether that will now be a Nazis coming up or simply the Soviets taking over this. Britain also had gotten a lot of steel from Sweden through both of the ports, and was continuing to do so, while the Germans were also, they were competing with each other for buying Swedish steel at the time. Of course, as fortunately for Britain, like most of their wood came from Scandinavia, their lumber. A lot of their steel came from Scandinavia as well as other places. A lot of their oil came from Romania. But fortunately for them, they had alternative supplies. Like there's plenty of lumber in Canada. It's just further to, ship it. And all the oil, the biggest oil producer at the time was the U.S. And you could come from there. Or get supplies instead of, once the Mediterranean is closed, you just got to go around. So mostly Britain is just fine for getting access to any of the resources. It just incredibly increases the time it takes to ship stuff, and in some cases it's needing to significantly increase the local production. Say, there was, I don't know, 10,000 men working at lumber mills and yards and cutting down the trees. They need to up that to 50,000 to meet British needs or something. So that's a lot of people, and it takes training to be a lumber person, and not everyone's suited for it. And being a lumber person here isn't like the Women's Land Army or the ATS or whatever in Britain, where women were felling trees for the war effort. These trees are bigger and heavier industrial movement of it, that you just can't readily put women in it. It's just an upper body strength, people. It's not I know we have very few women watching this, but it's any social justice warriors out there who watch this thing. It's purely a body strength issue, of swinging the axe. They don't all have power tools. It's not that you can get, well, we'll just get 10 women instead of 5 women to pick something up. Well, sometimes it's just not practical to do it, and that kind of thing. So it's an inequality between men and women in a physical capability. So Britain has alternative accesses compared to its traditional ones for resources, where Germany, because of the various blockade elements, and that's part of the reason the Navy is pushing to get Norway, is to be able to use its bases, whether for submarine warfare or just other, the Royal Navy can just hang out here, because at least at the early times, they're not sure that Germany's going into Norway. I mean, Netherlands. The Netherlands sort of kind of thinks it can remain neutral, and they sort of kind of think that, well, they're going to hold out in France. So at least because even the German army at the Fall Gelb start had no real thought that they were going to take down Paris like they did. A lot of the army thought it's going to be another sort of World War I. We're going to make some great gains and stabilize the line, and this time try to do some better stuff and whatnot. So that they're looking at this sort of ability to blockade, where the Navy's looking at, well, but if we have bases all the way up here, we can do not just commerce raiders, but try to do some merchant smuggling type operations, which they do some of that. Anyways, in and out, and just make it harder. So there's this big push to get Hitler to go up to Norway. So, okay. Now we haven't done Weserbung is how I pronounce that, but probably have that wrong. Yet. Prepare our planning. Again, just sort of me nitpicking revolverheld. If you're watching, I'm going to tag some of these, and hopefully you're watching. This is from, shall we say, from player feedback over the time. Give them a no option to these things. I understand the idea that 500 supplies, 250 money is minor for improving various things. But I don't know, for some reason, because we are gaining threat on Sweden. I don't know if that's going to help us or not, but we're harming our relations with Norway. But just to give the player, even if you're I know I didn't pick the module that has Hitler sort of demanding certain things happening, because I don't like that way of playing. But just to give the player a sense of control over destiny. Is and this I'm getting from feedback, is to give them a no option. And I've done this more and more over time, and sometimes, of course, hey, this is all good stuff for you, and there's no negatives, so yes, but I would just add in a have other plans or something like that. But yes. Okay, Finnish delegation called to Moscow on October 5th, 1939. The Soviet Union invited the Finnish delegation to Moscow for negotiations. The Soviet delegation demanded that the border between the USSR and Finland on the Karelian Isthmus be moved more westward, and that Finland destroy all existing fortifications on the Karelian Isthmus. Likewise, okay. So this just goes into the details. The Soviet divided. Okay. Again, this is firing under some of the right conditions, in that it's firing post. So obviously I did, and players will, not just me, delay the invasion of Poland and or victory in Poland. This should have a something tied in with the event chain that actually starts the Winter War. Obviously, at some point here, because I just know to have this province and this stuff happen just this way, there has to be a decision or whatever that triggers. The Winter War starts under conditions. I would just put this as a prequel or a event that fires, because now see, this is we're watching. So this is I'm speaking of revolverheld here. Sometimes these are just simply things that I've put just to sort of, when you don't have a choice for things like this, I've put, and again you can use it or not, as just personal stylish thing, is I put like diplomatic report, so that I'm informing the German player of something happening, which is obviously you're doing, but making it a little more clear to them that they don't have a this isn't, is Hitler talking to Quisling, and then does that meeting go well, and does he support Quisling, or decides Quisling's an asshole? And we're not going to. Obviously, he didn't, but that's a German decision. Where this is a Finnish Soviet decision. And so, yes, the German player has no influence over the outcome of this, so that's fine. So just having the one thing there. But I would tie this more closely as fired, could be just simply, as part of the event chain, which I know goes into, meaning you got to take another file out of black ice and say fire event X here, or something like that. I would dig that into whatever is happening with starting of the Winter War, whether a prequel or actually as part of the start of the Winter War. So operational plans called for the invasion to start on November 1939. Okay, and so and as also maybe, well, if you're going to include dates like this and like this, again, this is not a bad thing. I think a good thing, and I've asked a lot of players, and they like the idea that you're putting the history here. Is would maybe add the word in here historically on October 39, meaning this may be happening in June, because the Winter War may not happen in winter, obviously, which would have a very different outcome militarily, I believe. But still, just the idea that if it's happening at some other time, clockwise, so I just add that little thing. Just some advice. Don't take it if you don't want it. It's only if you like the advice. Okay, Soviet-Lithuanian Mutual Assistance Treaty. This one didn't fire before for various reasons. With the things, why they sort of happen at times, and at times they don't, is just because I make an episode or two and then end the game and have only moved the clock a little ways, so this would have fired even earlier with the non-aggression packs here. Okay. Henschel und Son, large-scale production of the Panzer III, was the sole manufacturer of the Tiger I and Tiger II. In 1945, the company had 8,000 workers working in 2 shifts, each of 12 hours. Okay, that's interesting. I've probably seen that before, but I often wonder, because obviously that gets you to the 24 hours working in the day, so. Or whether they broke it up into 3 8-hour shifts. Sort of the other way to do it, or some such thing. Again, like, see, this is good. Who isn't going to spend, to get a tank factory and a couple of anti-aircraft guns for 5,000 metal? We can afford it. 5,000 supplies, we can afford it. The manpower, again, we can afford it. I mean, we're cutting it, but it's good. It's almost an obvious yes, of course, please, but just give that player that sense of thing. Air bases in Poland, yes, we want that. We should at least get some of the manpower back from that. Just my thoughts on the modding, and I do believe, because of some of the stuff, revolverheld does want my feedback. Oh, okay. Get to the top. Want the feedback on the events, and part of it is just for bugs, part of it is style. And yes, revolverheld, if you're still listening, some of it's just style, and you can decide to have a different style than me. That's perfectly fine and good, and maybe your style is better than mine. Some of it's stylistic, some of it though is more of a game bug and things are firing. And on that note, we're going to end the episode here. I want to thank you all for watching. Thank you for liking the videos. And of course, please post questions, comments, suggestions, ideas, corrections. Love hearing from you. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.